This is Grape Video 43, Vineyard Site Selection, Part 5, the Backyard Vineyard. And this video is just for people who are interested in planting a vineyard in their backyard. If you're a commercial grower growing hectares or acres of grapes, this video is not for you, but you're certainly welcome to watch it. Let's start out with a few refreshers. Grapevines like to be in sun, and they need to be in sun to perform well. Take a look at this vineyard on a slope and notice to the west, or which is to the left, that row of trees. Well, the grapevines next to those trees are in the shade in the afternoon, and they do not perform well. And no grapevine will perform well when it is grown in partial or full shade. So if you're going to plant a vineyard in your backyard, you better have a sunny location or forget it. Here's a situation with a trellised grapevine, and it was planted under a couple of trees. This is not a good situation. The grapevines will survive. In fact, they'll try to grow up through the tree to reach the sunlight, but they won't grow good grapes. There won't be much fruitfulness to the vine, and those grapes that do form will not ripen well. So don't do this. Here's a picture up through that trellis, and you can see there's canes and shoots running here and there, but see how pale the leaves are, and I don't see any clusters on these vines because it just won't happen if you try to grow a grapevine in the shade. Well, here's a backyard, and it's mostly shady. If you took out those trees on the left, sure, you could grow some grapevines in place of those trees. But try to put a row of grapevines down through this grassy area, and you're asking for disaster. Well, there's no place here at all for a grapevine, and those big trees in the background are suggesting to me that this backyard gets a lot of shade through the day, and it would not make sense to stick a grapevine amidst this beautiful, beautiful backyard that has a lot of shade. Here's another backyard, and yes, in the foreground and on the left, lots of shade during the day. But right about here, if you wanted to plant a row of grapevines, it might do you well, and you might get a decent growth of the vine, and you might get decent grapes. So number one, if you're going to plant grapevines in the backyard, it had better be in a sunny location. Okay, well, you don't have a backyard that's this big, but I put this picture in to say as a refresher that if your backyard has some topography and you can gain some high ground versus low ground, by all means, put your grapevines in the backyard in the high ground, not in the low ground of the backyard, like these vines are up on a slope overlooking the valley. And as a refresher again, this basil sitting on our kitchen counter will root in water, but as we've said before, grapevines will not. Put hardwood cuttings in a bucket of water, and yes, the buds will break and the shoots will start to grow, and you will never get any development of roots in that bucket of water. And so even in your backyard, try to avoid really heavy, wet, waterlogged soils for planting your vines, if at all possible. Okay, let's talk a little about how you plant a vineyard in the backyard. This is a vineyard that we had years ago, and the rows are just 5 feet apart. That's why it looks so narrow. you don't have to plant a vineyard in the backyard with row spacings of 8, 9, 10 feet if that doesn't make sense to you. What you do have to take into account is how you will manage those vines with what equipment, perhaps a walking mower or a riding mower that you have. And in this case, those 5-foot rows are quite manageable with this very narrow tractor that's coming down the row. So if you can mow an area that's 4 or 5 feet between rows of vines, if you're going to have more than one row, that's perfectly fine. And let's look at the rule of thumb that you should follow when spacing rows of vines in your backyard. Here it is. This is from Richard Smart's article, as cited at the bottom. And essentially this says the width of your row should not be any narrower than about a 1-to-1 ratio to the height of the canopy. So if you were to build trellises 6 feet tall, you could space your rows 6 feet wide as long as your riding mower can get down through there to mow the row middles, something like that. Here is a commercial vineyard up in the Leelanau Peninsula in northern Michigan. And I think you can see that these posts are only about 5 feet high. The trellises are only about 5 feet high. And Larry Mawby in his vineyard showing us what he's done here is showing us a vineyard that has row spacings of only about 6 feet. And that works wonderful for him because the trellis is only 5 feet high. So take that into consideration. Here, on the other hand, are vines on a trellis that are 8 foot tall at our research center in southwest Michigan. And the rows are 9 feet apart. So that fulfills that rule of thumb of a 1-to-1 ratio, and we can build trellises 8 feet tall as long as the rows are at least that wide, and they are. So be creative when you plant one or more rows of vines in your backyard, and you don't have to have rows this wide if you're going to mow them with your riding mower. Okay, this is not site selection, but while we're on the topic of a backyard vineyard, would make a couple of suggestions of ways that you could trellis the vines other than standard methods. And one of them is this grape arbor that we designed many years ago. It's 10 feet square, and as you can see, it makes a wonderful area to put a picnic table underneath in the shade if you have a sunny area like this shown here. Here is that arbor when we just started the vines up each of the 4 corners to begin training the vines. And here is the array of grapes hanging down from the arbor so that you can sit at your table, and when the grapes are ripe, reach up, grab a cluster of grapes to eat. It's a nice way that is unusual to trellis vines in your backyard. Now, if you want to build this 10-foot, or that is to say 3-meter square arbor, you can find the directions and the materials list at the link below. And you can click on that link right now, and it will take you to that website and that page for this report. And then if you're going to actually build this, you probably will want to do a print of that report so you can follow all the directions and have a copy of the materials list. Makes a nice project, and you'll be glad you did this when you sit under the table in the summer. Another option that isn't straightforward is what we call a modified Munson training system. And we have a whole grape video just on this system and establishing it. This is especially good if you're going to try to grow table grapes in the backyard. So go to and find Grape Video 19 to get all the details of how to build the trellis for a modified Munson training system if this interests you. Well, I'm going to talk about trellis here at the end a little, because building a trellis in a backyard can be very challenging. Why? Because you're typically having relatively short rows of trellis, and that makes for a challenge to keep the wires in that short row tight so that you can have a nice training of the vines. I put this picture in. Here are end posts in a vineyard we planted not too many years ago, and you can see the wires are coming down. And what are the wires attached to at the ground? They're attached to anchors that we put in the ground to keep those posts from moving in towards the vines when we get a lot of stress on them from the weight of the crop. This is one of those anchors. It's the only picture I had. And if you're going to put those anchors in, these are typically 4 feet or 120 centimeters long. And at the base of that, there's a 6-inch or a 15-centimeter disc that pulls against the soil and keeps the anchor from moving up and out. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. Another option, if you're in the backyard vineyard, is to take the end posts on your rows and bury them deeper than normal so they just won't move. I doubt that you can get your posts as deep as these. These are 10-foot posts, and they are set 5 feet in the ground. Well, I don't think you'll do that in a backyard vineyard. But if you get your end posts angled back away from the vines at least 4 feet in the ground, chances are you can get away without putting in those anchors to keep everything tight in your trellis. Well, here is an end post and a wire tightening device that we're using to put tension on the top wire on the trellis. And I put this photo in to remind me to tell you, do not over tension wires, especially on those short rows in the backyard, because if you do, when the weather gets cold, those wires will contract and they will cause problems with the trellis that you've installed. So just snug them up and don't over tighten wires, especially in a short row of trellis in the backyard. Lastly, I came upon these springs years ago, and they are handy for very short rows. I can't tell you where to buy them, and you'll have to search online for them, but in very short row situations, these springs can be put in line with the wires so that when you tension against this spring, and when things contract in the wintertime, when the temperatures get lower, these springs tighten a little more, but you don't put excessive stress on your whole trellis arrangement. That's kind of a neat thing. And I have these on a very short row of table grapes that I grow for the family, and they work very nicely. Well, that's all we have to say about selecting a site and planting a vineyard in the backyard. We hope you get some helpful suggestions from this video. In our next video, we're going to talk about vineyard design and what you might be considering as you go about designing a vineyard and getting ready to plant it. But for now, we'll just say happy grape growing. See you next time.